Hey, Frank, good to have you back on here for round number two.
Hey, we're back like we left something.
Exactly. We have a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of things that I want to ask you. Before I dive into something a little more serious, what's your Super Bowl predictions for this year? Who you got going?
I got to go with the Ravens against anybody else.
Oh,
But if I had to pick somebody coming out of the NFC, uh, I would say right now, as bad as I don't want to say this, and as much as it pains me to say this,
I
the
know you will.
Cowboys are good.
Yeah, they are. They are looking good. I agree with you 100%. And I know what it's like to go with the home team.
Yeah, so my prediction will be the Ravens and the Cowboys.
Okay, good. So we talked about the Marine Corps birthday ball earlier today, and I have a question about that. I've heard many rumors because I'm not active duty. I thought all the birthday balls were canceled across the Marine Corps, but yet I've seen some people recently go to some actual events. So what's the situation with that?
Yeah, so what they did is it was based on the units, and some units decided to cancel it because of COVID restrictions and CDC mandates, and others were able to utilize social distancing and the ability to have their personnel vaccinated and things like that. So it was by unit, and so some units decided not to do it, and then there were others that decided to do it. However, most of all units, if they didn't have a ball, at a minimum, they had a cake cutting ceremony in which we're going to have ours on November 10th, where we will do the traditional cake cutting portion of the ball for the Marines.
That's great. Glad to hear it. So, a lot of people don't know this about you unless you open up to someone close to you. And I know how you are because you're very stoic. You were blown up in Iraq and seriously wounded, and you recovered. And then just recently, you had surgery, major surgery on your back or your neck, and you're in recovery now. But knowing who you are, I know that you will be dedicated and focused to recover, and you're a physical man, but you hide it. You don't use it as a crutch or an excuse. And not everyone's like that. So tell us what happened to you with Iraq. How was the recovery, and what are you going through now?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't talk about it a lot. You're right. So August 10th, 2014, in Afghanistan on a routine mission. I was a first sergeant, and I was in a CASEVAC vehicle, casualty evacuation vehicle. For those that don't know, when there are individuals that get wounded, typically the first sergeant is the one that collects, the personnel and gets them to a position or a point where they're evacuated for treatment, triage, and things of that nature. So I'm the last vehicle to come out of a 5 vehicle convoy, and each vehicle goes out of the village. My vehicle's the last vehicle, explosion. I don't remember much after that other than I remember waking up, the doc standing over top of me, and smoke and debris everywhere and all of these things. I get ground medevac back to Bastion for treatment and things like that. Once I got back to the States and they did the MRI, CAT scans, and all of that stuff, what I was told by the doctor was that during the explosion, my head went up, helmet hit the top of the vehicle, which compressed my spine, and there were going to be issues, in the future. So fast forward, I'm doing pull-ups after one of my workouts, and while I'm doing pull-ups, I fall off the bar because my entire left side goes numb, and it had been giving me issues. Yeah, I kind of ignored those issues. I didn't want to have surgery, but at this point, I just couldn't. I couldn't do it anymore because of that. So I went into medical, had an MRI done, and like I thought, it had gotten worse. And basically, what they did was a discectomy, and a discectomy is where they go in, they remove the disc from your neck, your spine, and they replace it with plastic spacers. There's a couple of rods, some screws, and things like that. What I didn't know, and I learned this prior to having the surgery, is I thought they would go in through the back, but from what the doctor told me, the neurologist, is that if they go in through the back, they have to cut, your muscle, some other things to get to your neck. So what they did is they went in, and I have a scar right here on my neck. They went in through the front and removed the disc from the front. And the recovery time for that is about 6 to 8 months. So I'm currently going through recovery now, but still pushing through.
Oh, okay. I think I said Iraq, but it was Afghanistan where you were injured,
Yep.
is what
Yep.
you said. Okay. So based on your description, that sounds awful. And the recovery doesn't sound like it's a lot of fun. There's probably a lot of people that might have been medically retired or pursued medical retirement based on that injury, but not a guy like you. And that was 2014. And look how much you've progressed and healed since, just another testament to who you are and how focused you are. And it has a lot to do with your upbringing, I'm sure. When you were growing up in Baltimore, just, everyone's background and everyone's upbringing is so different. And, before you talk about your current recovery and your surgery, take me back to when you were in high school. What was it like for you as a young man in Baltimore? And how did you become interested in the Marine Corps?
You know what? I'm gonna go back a little further than high school and tell a story that I very rarely ever tell.
Okay.
We go back to elementary school about 35 years ago. And I'm gonna go back because it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about, and I'll fast forward in a second. But when I was 8 years old, I was a lot of people don't know this. I had a speech impediment, and I went to speech therapy uh, three times a week. And I will never forget this. My mom takes me into speech therapy, and I remember the speech therapist telling my mom that, hey, it's pretty bad. I stuttered a lot, and she said that we will get him to an acceptable level to be able to communicate, but it's not like he'll ever be a guest speaker or a guy up at a podium speaking to people, but we will get him to a point where he will be able to effectively communicate. And I never forgot that. And as a kid, what I started doing was I would read comic books a lot. And then I started reading comic books in the mirror to myself as if I was in front of an audience. Because what terrified me the most was reading out loud in school because of my speech impediment. So I used that as motivation and as a springboard to get me to a point where I could effectively communicate. And this was at 8 years old. Fast forward now, 35 years later, I speak frequently in front of hundreds of people. And I wish that speech therapist was one of those people so she could see me now.
Well, I know this story. You shared this story with me before, and I've witnessed how dynamic of a speaker you were, even as a staff sergeant and a gunnery sergeant, and how people just, hung on every word you had. And not just prepared speeches, but also when people put you on the spot with a question, you were intelligent enough and educated enough, and you could articulate many different things to answer those questions. And that says a lot about you too, because we all know that there's a lot of people that we witness, whether it's in the military or civilians, that can rehearse a speech and they give it eloquently. But if they're given a question to answer, they start to fumble and stumble and bumble and all that other good stuff. And so when you talk about reading a comic book, based on that scar on your neck, were any of them like Blade, like Daywalker? Because that's kind of what made me think of. Like you're like the living Daywalker here.
A lot of it was normally Superman and Spider-Man and things like that. But
Oh,
yeah,
DC Comics. Yeah. Okay.
yep, DC Comics. Yep, absolutely.
So
Definitely.
what tempted you to the Marine Corps while you were growing up in Baltimore, like in high school? What was it?
So I'll tell you this: I never had any ambition of joining the military at all. Didn't even know the difference between the Marines, the Army, any branch of service. It wasn't until I graduated that my dad, he had this little thing where it was the 1890 rule of, at 18 years old, you have 90 days after graduation, to figure out what it is that you were going to do and be out of the house. So
I like that.
after I graduated in June of 1995, I'll never forget, about 40 days into post graduation, my dad, he comes to me and say, "Hey, what's going on? What's your plans? What do you plan to do?" And I didn't have a plan. So he said, "Hey, get dressed. We're going to go up and see all of the recruiters in the armed forces station." And I said, "Okay." So we go up, and the very first recruiter, as you walk in, it was the Marines. And I never forget going in. This guy was sharp in uniform. He presented himself well. I was so thoroughly impressed. By the time he got done, that was it. That was it for me. I said, "This is what I want to do," and I joined the Marine Corps. But a funny story about that, So I had buyer's remorse about 2 weeks later. And I started thinking about, maybe I made the wrong choice. So I go back and see the recruiter again. And I tell this guy, I said, hey, I think I made the wrong choice. Um, Not something I want to do. I think I want to do something else. And he hears me out, shakes my hand, and he says, okay, I got it. It's at least you gave it a shot. You came in and you thought about it. And then I said, I appreciate it. And I was relieved. I said, oh, this guy understands. He gets it. So as I'm getting ready to walk out, I get to the door and I'm leaving. And he says, I don't know why I wasted my time. This guy wouldn't have made it anyway. And it didn't register to me until I got out of the recruiting station and I'm walking and I thought about it. I said, did he just say I wouldn't have made it? And I turned around and I went back and I said, hey, what did you say on my way out? And he said, yeah, you wouldn't have made it. I don't know why I wasted my time. And from that point, it became, me proving that I could make it, to this guy. So that's how I got there.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. He challenged you. He gave you that little nugget to say you aren't worth it. So you came back on your own admission.
He did. And,
Yeah, good technique.
I know he was like, oh, thank God, when I came back in there.
So we talked earlier this morning, and by the way, I changed my shirt from the last interview, but I noticed you didn't. But anyway, okay, so you just went through a severe and serious surgery and you're on the road to recovery now, and you're still active duty and you still look great. You're still strong. I know it took a while to get back where you want. You probably still aren't there. And you're probably, I would guess, we worked together 2008, 2009. I would say you're 45 to 55 pounds heavier than when I knew you then. You've put on so much size and how you've trained yourself. Am I close?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I was about 155 as a drill instructor. I'm around somewhere between 205, 210 now.
See, I like standing next to you back then because I was bigger than you. Now, every time I'm around you, I'm like, stand over here, man. Stand over here.
Yes, I really got into training and trying to bulk up when I was in Afghanistan. And my first deployment to Afghanistan in 2011, I got with some guys out there and we trained a lot. And I was about 180 when I went out on the deployment, and I got up to about 230. So I gained about 50 pounds of muscle out on deployment.
Wow.
And you see yourself every day in the mirror and you don't think that anything's changing. And I come back and I can't fit any of my clothes. I can't fit anything. And I had to buy a whole new wardrobe and uniforms and all that stuff. But since then, I've trimmed down and cut down to about 210. So I hover around 210 now.
Well, you look good. You're always fit the part. You always have the image of what a Marine should be identified as. And that's a testament to your dedication. And then being injured and blown up in an IED incident in Afghanistan. And then now, after recovering from this surgery, like I said earlier, many people would have thrown in the towel, and easily said, I can't do this anymore. I need to find another way of life. But not you, because you're dedicated to the Marine Corps. And that's something we'll talk about here in a few minutes, because I really want to know what your passions are after you get out of the Marine Corps, because I know that's the kind of person you are. You have a focus and a thought about what you want to do tomorrow. But how are you feeling now? What's your status right now? How you feel?
Yeah, I feel great. I was just recently cleared to start working out again and to listen to my body. And so I've been working out very, very little. What I did during the time that I had just got done with surgery, because a little secret, I've always had a fear or phobia of getting out of shape. And that's why I put the surgery off for so long. So once the surgery was complete and post-surgery, I started thinking of ways that I could stay in shape. And I started coming up with different ways. And it forced me to, one, change my diet and find other ways to be active to make sure that I didn't gain weight, unnecessary weight, and things like that. But I feel great right now. And I think moving forward, this situation has taught me to be smarter in how I train and smarter with nutrition. So not getting any younger. So I definitely had to make some changes anyway.
Obviously being a Marine, your daily schedule can fluctuate. You could probably have something routine for a month or two, and then it gets knocked out of out of whack, and then you go to a new duty station. It's all over the place. What's your typical like diet plan, or not? Maybe that's not a good word. What do you normally eat to be conscious and health conscious? If you're on the road, if you're traveling in a car, if you're out in the field, if you're deployed, do you always think about those type of situations?
I do. Yeah. So I meal prep a lot. And now I've gotten down my schedule and my routine to a point where if I'm traveling to a location, I will do the research and look ahead and see what meal prep companies they have in that area, and I'll call ahead, pre-order meals and things like that,
That's good.
to make sure I can kind of stay kind of where I want to when it comes to nutrition. So, but mainly, I like to eat a lot of chicken, a lot of chicken and fish, things like that. I try to stay away from things that red meats and stuff like that. Even though I'll eat those things sometimes, but
Yeah.
uh, like I used to, and
Right.
try to eat a lot of things with less carbs, more protein, things of that nature. And I'll tell you a little story, kind of a little secret. So I was prepping a couple of years ago. I wanted to compete, so I got a trainer and I started prepping with this trainer. And this is where I learned a lot from. She had me on a diet and a meal plan, and she said, "Hey, I need to bulk you up so that we can cut you down as it gets closer to the show." And I was eating close to 7,000 calories a day, 7 meals, and almost 1,000 calories per meal per day. And that's why I laughed when I saw you interviewing Orlando, and he talked about food and you got to eat. And I got to a point where I literally got tired of food and tired of eating because it was the same thing over and over and over again. But it did teach me a lot about nutrition and a lot of things that I didn't know.
Orlando's head is going to explode because we've mentioned him twice now in two interviews you and I have done after I interviewed him. So he's gonna his head's gonna swell up even bigger than it already is. One thing I didn't say in the interview we had together is that he used to fall asleep a lot when he'd sit down because he was so energetic and intense about everything he did.
Yeah.
As soon as he sat down, it was like a child. He passed out. Like he just crashed. And then, I mean, he'd have to get like wound back up again to get started. And only when he was like, he literally was over 300 pounds. I mean, huge and ripped.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
even
he's a
he
big guy.
will tell you. But when he was around 250, 260, his energy level was through the roof. I mean, you could just see that every time you put on another 10 pounds after 250, his energy level decreased. And
Wow. Wow.
it's amazing what the human body can tolerate and deal with, but there's a certain point where it breaks, I guess, and just tells you no more, you
Yeah,
know?
no, absolutely. Definitely.
So
Definitely.
I don't know if you remember when we were at Paris Island. I used to have a fun time with this. I love the drill masters that were at Paris Island when I was a first sergeant, and there were so many good ones. Um, and I remember I used to see them in the gym all the time. I'd go to the gym after we PT to DI school, and the class would go in session, and I would run to the gym and knock out a quick weight routine, and then change and be ready for the day. And I had that luxury as a first sergeant to do that. And I would see the drill masters in there, and they always wore boots and utes. And a lot of Marines would do that because it's easier to just drop your blouse and work out. And if you remember, there were quite a few drill masters that were stacked. You remember they were just
Yeah,
really loaded, right? And I had great conversations with them. And those are the kind of people I enjoy talking to. But I think we went to a moto run together for one of the companies, and all the drill masters were out there together. I don't know if you remember this or not. I walked up to all of the drill masters and I looked them up and down in their silkies, and I went, "Now I see why you guys wear boots and utes, hiding them legs." And they their their confidence went. I mean, all three of them. It was three of the male battalions. They their confidence just shot down into the pavement. I will never forget that. I've had a few of them reach out to me and make some comments and jokes to me privately, which has been a lot of fun. But
yeah, no, definitely. Don't
yeah,
skip leg day. Yeah.
no skip leg day. Now I know why you guys wear boots and utes all the time, hiding those little chicken legs. So Frank, is there let me get your opinion on this, and let me get your thoughts on this. Are leaders born, or are they developed?
I think a little bit of both. And it's my dad, actually, him and I had this conversation one time when I was a teenager, and we were sitting on the porch, and I remember there were some kids across the street from us playing, and my dad said, "Hey, look at those kids over there." So I look across the street, and I'm like, "What am I looking at other than some kids playing?" And these little boys couldn't have been no more than 5 or 6 years old.
Mm.
But there was one little boy that stood out. He was, wanted to be the fastest. He wanted to jump the highest. He wanted to show that he was the strongest and all these things. And my dad asked me, he said, "What do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see some kids playing." And he pointed all of those things I just mentioned out. And he said, "You see, that little boy doesn't know that he's a leader, and he's 5 or 6 years old. He doesn't even understand what leadership is yet, but he has leadership qualities. And if those leadership qualities aren't harnessed and cultivated over time, he'll lose it. Uh, so it needs to be developed over time." And I thought about that, especially as a Marine. I think that there are some individuals that are born leaders, but I think that if they don't sharpen those skills, or those skills aren't sharpened over time, they may just fall back into the general population of followers.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both when it comes to whether leaders are born or made. But I do think some are born with leadership qualities that, if they are sharpened the right way, they could go far.
If you read any book on leadership, if you study leadership, it's a common discussion, right? And you've heard so many answers. We all have our own theory. And you're right. It is a little bit of both, because when you think someone's born, they immediately have usually a mother and a father, or they have some kind of adult figure that begins to develop them and teach them skills. So those people would say they're not born, they're developed. But I had an interesting conversation actually just yesterday with some people. And one of the things that they brought up was, well, what happens if you have two people raised in the same environment and they are under the same tutelage of a mentor, a father, a mother, a grandparent, but yet they both take two different paths when it comes to showing qualities of leadership. One's maybe very passive and very introverted, and one's extroverted. And that's where I think it identifies as a little bit of both, where you're born with certain qualities before you're even developed.
Definitely.
Right?
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
My theory on leadership, and we've talked about it so many times, and there's people that will disagree with me, and that's fine. I thoroughly believe that leadership equates to influence. So just because you are in a position of authority doesn't mean you are a leader necessarily. I feel that if you're given a position of authority, you have the opportunity to lead. But if you don't influence people, you aren't leading anything. So you can be in the greatest position and have the highest authority. But if you're not influencing people, they're not buying into you, you're not leading anything. And I've witnessed it myself, where I was in a position where I influenced people, but I was also in a position where I felt like I didn't have enough influence. But somebody else subordinate to me, I noticed, was the leader in the group, and they stood
Yeah.
out.
Yep.
And
Happens all the time.
it happens all the time.
Time.
And as you get older, if you humble yourself, you can say, you know what? I can use a person like that to assist me in what needs to be done to accomplish something. Not everybody's going to look at me as the leader just because I'm in a position of authority. And this, because you're active duty, I'll be delicate how I ask you this question, right? Because I know that you can't be as open as I am. But let me tell you what frustrated me quite often when I was a first sergeant and a sergeant major. When you're on the distribution list with all your peers and someone senior at the next level emails all of you and says, leaders, comma, and he identifies everyone in the distribution list as a leader. I've argued with some of my peers. They said, yeah, I'm this rank. I'm definitely a leader. I wouldn't have gotten this far if I wasn't a leader. Well, I'm like, well, you aren't influencing anybody. I've heard and I've seen you operate. And I would say that not everybody on this list is a leader. That's a little bit self-anointing. But I get the conversation and argument with me saying, I earned this position, I earned this rank by being a leader. How dare you say I'm not? So I get that argument. But for me, just with the eye test, it would frustrate me just to self-anoint people because of a position.
Yeah, no, definitely. It brings to mind for me the Peter Principle, which basically states that a person is promoted to their highest level of incompetence. And sometimes you'll see, especially in organizations like the military, Marine Corps specifically, you'll see guys get promoted, and they may have been a great staff sergeant, but then they're not so much a great gunny, and so on and so forth. You see that a lot. I see that a lot, and you're right. It gets frustrating sometimes, to see it, but it happens.
I made many poor choices at every rank where I might have had great influence and people gave me a lot of kudos for how I operated. However, I had a weakness when it came to, if I felt one person challenged me personally, I attacked them back. And instead of being, in the position I was in to maybe have a little bit more of an understanding and a thoughtful conversation, even if that person frustrated me, I didn't do that. I went into attack mode. Like, you're coming to my level, I'm not going to your level, and that's it. My way or the highway, without me saying that. And I didn't think I was that way, but looking back as I've gotten older, of course, and then after I've retired, I look back and you learn lessons. And if I could go back, I would change things. But when I did make those bad decisions, I had already progressed and moved into, I thought, a better version of myself as a leader at that time than I had been 5 years earlier. Just continued to snowball and progress.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where maturity and experience comes into play, and I think that a lot of times, and I see this a lot in the Marine Corps, where a guy will get promoted to first sergeant at 10 years or 11 years or something along those lines, something really quick, and those are the anomalies. You'll see those time to time. But then you'll see another guy that's 18 years, and when he finally gets selected and promoted to first sergeant, and you take those two guys and you kind of stack them up against each other. It's not saying that one is better than the other, but one obviously has more experience and than the other one, and sometimes that plays a huge role when you look at performance and things like that. So
Yeah. So in the same conversation with leadership, is there a difference between a leader and a manager? And if there is, what's your theory on that?
yes, I just had this conversation actually with corporals. I talked to a few corporals about this, and they were newly promoted, and we talked about leadership versus management. And my theory and my thought process when it comes to leadership versus management is you lead people and you manage things. And don't get me wrong, you can manage people as well. You see it a lot in the civilian sector and civilian world where they, they're managers and things like that. But I think leadership dives a bit deeper than management does into all aspects of those that you're leading, getting into their personal lives and kind of helping them out that way, as well as their professional lives. Whereas in management, you come in, you punch a clock, you kind of, hey, this is what needs to get it done, within this time frame, and then we punch a clock and we leave. So I think that there's a clear separation between leadership and management, from my perspective.
Yeah, I like that. That's very good. Very thoughtful. And the fact that you share that with corporals, and I know how you are, you probably had a discussion. It wasn't a lecture. You had feedback, and then you bounced your feedback off of their feedback and then put your spin on it, I'm sure, knowing how you are. A misconception with people that I've met over my time in the Marine Corps and when I've been retired that didn't serve. And I've had a few locations I've been, just like I'm sure you have too, and other people, where they had an idea they thought the Marine Corps was like. And here's the one common misconception I ran into from people that were educated is they felt and thought that in the military, specifically the Marine Corps, that we operated off being told what to do. So we had to stand by for orders, and somebody gave us an order, and then we executed it with resources and logistics and probably with a lot of vigor. My argument to them was that's a misconception. That does happen. However, we preach having a person think outside the box, being initiative based to bring forth 4 or 5 different tasks that need to be completed before they're given an order, knowing it's coming from higher and above. You want that small unit leader. And it's the reasons why in Vietnam and Afghanistan, for example, you have young NCOs that are the ones leading the charge, men and women, doing the most severe task and accomplishments at that level. There's no way you could stand by waiting to be told what to do if that if that's the people that were actually executing everything at that level. What say you?
Yeah, no, definitely. If you can remember back in the 90s with General Krulak, the strategic corporal, and going all the way down to the NCO level. And I think we do it better than anyone. And I'm not just saying it and being biased towards Marine Corps, but I think we do it better than anyone, pushing leadership and responsibility down to the lowest level to operate. And then even in some of those positions, you'll see Lance Corporals holding billets of increased responsibility because of personnel shortage or just don't have the people. So you may have a Lance Corporal leading a fire team and doing a phenomenal job at it because we push that down to the lowest level and kind of push on them to act independently and think as independent, individuals and Marines. And they may go out and do a patrol where it's just a fire team, and that corporal or Lance Corporal are making decisions. And I think we do it better than anyone, because we've taught that and we preach that, coming from the top all the way down.
I don't think you're biased at all. I mean, just because you're a Marine, I mean, everyone will have their own opinion based on their own experience. I can tell you from my experience, I worked quite a bit with the Army, and I obviously served with the Navy too, but I worked with the Army and I went to a school for a long period of time with the Army. I think from my experience and what I've evaluated that our Marine NCOs, the corporal sergeant, do it better than anybody. No service does it like ours. None. And that's not just a biased opinion. That's off evaluation and fact. But I will give the Army credit where their senior NCO, which is our staff NCO, especially like at the E89 level, are more involved tactically and logistically at like the operational and strategic level than ours are in the absence of officers. They typically will have their sergeant major or their command sergeant major, master sergeant, first sergeants very involved in all those things I mentioned without the presence of an officer, where in the Marine Corps, a lot of times you see an operations officer and things of that nature.
Yeah, no, you're right. And you can probably speak to this more than I can, having gone to the Army Sergeant Major Academy and seeing it, firsthand. But the one thing that I see that the Army does is, once a guy goes from E7 to E8, you have the Master Sergeant and the First Sergeant, but they kind of go back and forth. Same thing with Command Sergeant Major, and I think it's Garrison Sergeant Major, where they do operations as well as senior enlisted advisement.
Yep.
I think that's honestly brilliant, looking at that, because you don't lose that experience and knowledge in a particular MOS. So I think it's brilliant.
Yes, it is. This the operations sergeant major, which is like our master guns in the Marine Corps. So they end up doing both roles. And then before they become a command sergeant major, they're an operations sergeant major. Now things could have changed. So I've told you this before, and just to kind of reiterate this, I've been retired 8+ years, and it's going to continue to grow. And I find it very humbling that people still, like you and others, reach out to a person like me to still seek my advice on a certain topic. And this is what I've come to tell people by humbling myself. I'm 8 years removed from current policy. I don't want to give you an answer. Find somebody that's currently serving that can give you a better answer. I'm not the right person, even though I appreciate you asking me. If you want to ask me about dealing with people, leadership skills, it doesn't matter what technology comes into play. People are people, scenarios on giving advice and being told no, trying to accomplish a task and figuring out personalities, that's timeless. So sure, I can talk to you about that all day long, but not current policies and procedures. So same with the Army. Even though I'm saying this about the Army from my experience, the Army could have changed drastically from all I know in the last 8+ years.
Yeah, no, you're right. And, I'm glad you said that. Things change almost daily, it seems like, in the Marine Corps when it comes to policy things of that nature. And some days I'll sit down and read a Mar Admin, or I'll see a Marine Corps bulletin, and I'm like, holy crap, that just changed. And so seeing things change all the time, it could be very easy to retire today and be completely out of touch tomorrow because of that.
100%. 100%. And again, it's humbling to be asked those things because people want to seek your advice. And I get that. But again, to humble myself, and I think not to speak for others, it's just very smart to say the people that are currently serving, like you, are more in the now of what to know. So I'm not speaking for everyone around the Marine Corps that's retired, but the position I've taken, and I've actually been questioned on this by some people privately, like, why don't you talk more about the Marine Corps? Why don't you are such a motivator. You always are out in front of people. Why aren't you commenting more? Why aren't you posting more? It's the path I took when I retired. I love the Marine Corps. It may be who I am. I still cherish it. That will always be who I am. In fact, I just had a recent tattoo that covered up an old one, the only one I have on my back, and it's a compass with mountains in it. But in the center of that compass that you see commonly around tattoo shops, I have an eagle, globe, and anchor in the middle of it, which is the centerpiece of, what I like to do in my life outside of my job. And that's what I have on my back. And that just tells me and tells you how important the Marine Corps is to me. But the path I also took is that I want to step aside because I'm off the treadmill where people like you who are still serving are on it, and you're exposed to things that I'm not even aware of. How and why should I comment and complain about how I think the Marine Corps is going in the wrong direction? It's probably the right direction. It's the wrong direction for me because I'm putting it into the eyes of when I served. But I think people like that are a problem. Last thing I'll say, and I'll let you respond to this. Again, it goes back to Parris Island. I can't remember the name of the bank, but the bank at Parris Island that the retired Sergeant Major Moore, that used to be the depot Sergeant Major, was the retired gentleman that ran the bank, and he used to come to our graduations. You remember him?
Yeah.
Really fit guy, older man. He was great to me. He walked up to me at one of our ceremony practices, and I was in the very back of the theater. And long story short, he just said, "You know what, First Sergeant?" He goes, "You see any dinosaurs walking around Earth anymore?" And I was like, "No, Sergeant Major." And he said, "Why?" I said, "They're extinct." He said, "They're extinct because they couldn't adapt." And he said, "That's what some of your peers are like. They can't adapt with the changes. They can't progress with the changes. They're dinosaurs. They're going to die on the vine. They're going to be extinct. Don't be a dinosaur." That's all he said to me. And the way he said it, he was an older man, still fit. And as simple as that was such a powerful statement. And what's funny is I shared that with somebody that was senior to me that was still active duty. And they were like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm like, well, I guess you're the dinosaur.
Yeah, no, definitely. For sure. Yeah, I'll tell you, it's funny you say Sergeant Major retired Moore. He was the guest speaker for my DI school class, 3TAC 06, when I went through drill instructor school. And I still remember his speech. And, that's uncommon. Normally, when you have a guest speaker at a formal school, sergeant's course or something along those lines, you typically years later can't even remember who the guest speaker was. But his message was so powerful and impactful and relevant that I never forgot him or his message when years later, and today I still think about that, and I'm like, man, that guy's message, it was timeless, and that's what made it so impactful, because it was timeless. It wasn't about current policy or anything like that, but it was more along the lines of people, like you said earlier, which made it impactful and powerful and hard to forget.
So what's next for you, like post Marine Corps? And I don't know if you're retiring anytime soon, but you are going to retire at some point. Everyone has a passion or something they want to chase. So what direction do you see yourself taking?
Something I thought about doing, and I'm looking at a few options now, because retirement does come up quickly from what I understand and hear. I have about 3.5 years left. That'll be 30 years. So I want to continue to help people, just like I am in the Marine Corps with, young Marines, and Marines of the same grade, and even senior Marines. I'm in a people business and helping people. And I think that That's something that I want to do outside the Marine Corps. So what I've toyed around with in my mind was the idea of training people and helping people reach their fitness and physical goals. Not looking to profit huge, anything like that, but looking more along the lines of watching the transformation of people. And I think that that's something that I really, really want to get into post Marine Corps, because it would be one, I think it would help me continue to stay fit
Yeah.
and stay sharp, and then also help someone that wants to help and is looking to make a change, a lifestyle change physically, and just assist those people in reaching their goals.
You've always been a selfless man ever since I've the first time I met you up until today. You've always been a selfless man, and your answer now is so believable and sincere to me because I know how you are and how you think. So that's wonderful. And your upbringing has a lot to do with it because you were challenged and where you grew up and the things that you accomplished while you're in the Marine Corps. You know, it's a very rewarding story, and I always appreciate you sharing with me any story you've told me about your past. If I've heard it once, it's great hearing it the second and third time because there's always a message behind your stories. And I feel like I'm that way too. And I relate to you because there are people that will tell you stories just for the sheer fact of telling a story. And it's okay. Sometimes it's comical, but if there's never a message behind it, sometimes it can be rather boring or dry,
Yeah,
you know?
no, definitely.
Yeah. But I'm glad to hear that's your thought process and what you want to do. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I've thought about it a lot, and that's really the path that I want to take, post Marine Corps. And,
Yeah.
we'll see. Hopefully it works out.
Yeah, that's great. So let me ask you, what do you think? I don't know why I do that every time I ask a question. I got to get out of that habit. Let me ask you, just to ask the question. See, I'm learning
Yeah,
too. I'm learning too. I catch myself on little phrases or things that I need to cut out when I like try to interview or talk. Um, Even as good as I think I might be, as comfortable as I might be, I catch myself doing that. And I won't edit this out. I'll let it play as is because this is just a conversation, no different than us being on the phone.
yeah,
Right?
definitely.
Do you have a favorite, maybe not a favorite rank, because I know that's unfair sometimes, but let's say two. Do you have your top two favorite ranks that you've held thus far and why?
Yes. And most people say this, and I'm not saying this because most people say this. This is a fact. And those two ranks were sergeant and gunnery sergeant. And I'll tell you why. As a sergeant, you're not quite a staff NCO yet. A lot of responsibilities placed on you, and you're an NCO. And by the time you become a sergeant, especially with a little time in grade, you've kind of figured it out and kind of mastered the NCO uh, pay grades of corporal and sergeant. And I really thoroughly enjoyed being a sergeant. And that was one of my favorite ranks, if you will, as a Marine, was as a sergeant, because a lot of things pushed down to me and a lot of things were pushed up to me from junior Marine. So I loved being a sergeant. And then gunnery sergeant was absolutely one of my favorite ranks as well. And if you remember correctly, I got promoted to gunnery sergeant at Paris Island.
Yep.
And so I spent time there as a gunnery sergeant, and then went back out to the operating forces as a gunnery sergeant. And a lot of people don't know this, but the monitor gave me a few options leaving Paris Island, and one of them was 2nd AV Battalion. And the reason I chose 2nd AV Battalion, I could have went many other places, but in AVs, the gunnery sergeant is the motor T chief, and there's no master sergeant or master gunnery sergeant over him, and it's just you and a lieutenant, and then you're leading a platoon of Marines of about 150, and that's why I chose to go there as a gunnery sergeant, as opposed to going somewhere else where I would have been one of maybe 3 or 4 other gunnery sergeants within a unit. So it was definitely a learning curve for me, but definitely I had a great time being a gunnery sergeant and a sergeant.
Spot on. That's great. I concur with those two ranks for sure. And like you said, most people say those ranks for a reason. But
Definitely.
did you feel that way when you were a sergeant, or did you learn it later after you moved up and said, man, that was a great position? Like you didn't enjoy the moment. I'm on to
Yeah,
something.
yeah, no, for sure. I didn't know it at the time. As a sergeant, you're like, oh man, I love this. I love the fact of being a sergeant, but you hate every minute of it because so much stuff is getting pushed on you because of the expectation of being a sergeant. And then once I became a staff sergeant, I started thinking back of so many other things I could have done to be effective as a sergeant, and I'm like, man, there were some missed opportunities there. But no, for sure, I really, really did enjoy it as I was going through it, but not as much as I probably could and should have
Sure.
as a sergeant and gunnery sergeant.
How about a least favorite duty station? Least favorite.
Least favorite duty station.
Yeah.
I would say, that's a good question. I would say probably Camp Johnson. I was stationed at Camp Johnson actually just prior to going to Parris Island. And it wasn't the duty station itself, but it was I think the duty, because you go from the operating forces into a training environment, and you get young Marines from MCT, and a lot of which have to go to MAP platoon, which is Marines awaiting training and things like that. And I don't know, it was something about Camp Johnson, but I will say this about being there. I think Camp Johnson prepared me to be a drill instructor more than anywhere else. And the reason I believe that is because I was an instructor and I had an opportunity to go through formal school instructor course and get time on a platform in front of young Marines and train young Marines and things like that in a training environment. So when I came to Parris Island, it was just sharpening those skills up. And that is what helped me when it was time, when I went up for the board to go to drill instructor school, was my experience as a platform instructor. And I just used, those skills when I went in that board.
Yeah. Okay. So not a least favorite duty station so much, but maybe a least favorite duty billets.
Duty, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have a favorite PT session that you'd like to either have done to you or that you like to lead since you've been in those positions?
So two of them. The one that I love to do, I call it Blue Falcon PT with the Marines. And the Marines typically love it when I do this. And basically, split the Marines up into two teams, and there are maybe about 10 stations, depending on how many Marines, and burpees, flutter kicks, push-ups, things like that. And there's one Marine that is running out about 50 yards and running back with ammo cans. And the amount of repetitions that the other Marines are doing depends on how long it takes that Marine to get down and back with the ammo cans before they can rotate through the stations. So I call it, Blue Falcon PT for that reason. And the Marines typically love it. But one of my favorite PT sessions that was done to me actually was by First Sergeant John Paul Corville. And it was if I remember correctly, it was called the Ring.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't set this up so you could put me on this pedestal, and it looks like you did. It looks like I did, but no. You're talking about Lord of the Rings PT.
Lord of the Rings PT. Lord of the Rings PT. Yeah. And that PT, I actually took, and the reason it was one of my favorites is because it incorporated a full body workout to include cardio. And I would take this PT with me when I went out to the fleet, and I started doing it as if it was my own. But at the end, there's a second part to it. We would always do the 400 Club. And for those that don't know what the 400 Club is, we would do 20 push-ups every minute for 20 minutes. And the goal was to not get on your knees, when you're doing those push-ups. So
I don't know if I ever told you, you know where I got the 400 Club from?
No.
Paul McKenna.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's what we would do when we worked at OCS, like our own separate PT with candidates or on our own as a staff when we didn't have the opportunity to go to the gym. He kind of came up with this, and we would challenge each other to push ourselves through that, and of course I put my own twist and changed it around a little bit to fit my personality. But yeah, that's where I got it from, was him.
Wow. Yeah, it is challenging for sure. I mean, it is something else.
It is.
And, when you first talk about it, it doesn't sound like a lot. Um, it doesn't sound like a lot, but after like round 5, that's 100 push-ups. It starts getting a little challenging. The arms start getting a little tight.
When I was in 3-4 before I went to Paris Island, the Marines hated it. They would roll their eyes every time we had a 96. I would always go out to do a 400 club before we had Liberty. And then at Paris Island at my company, before I went to DI school, they hated it too because I would do it before we picked up. And the running joke was that when they were doing their DI speech and they raised their arm, you could hear because they were sore when they raised their arm.
Yeah.
And they hated it, but I tell you, it became stories that they would tell and make fun of and they would laugh about. And then ironically, of course, like it always is, as some of these guys moved on and they became in higher ranks and positions of authority, they implemented things that I had done
Yeah.
that they hated. And I did the same thing. There were things that I took from people that I hated, but it worked and I tried them. And it was for the greater good of taking care of people. They just don't see it at the time. They think you're just trying to stand on your high horse, but there's always a method to the madness and a reason behind most of the things that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like the parent and the child. It's the same thing. You know, you find yourself doing things that your parents did
Right.
when you were a child to your own children, and it's because now you have the experience and the knowledge and the wisdom in those areas.
Do you have any stories where you had gotten in some type of trouble and somebody stepped in and taught you a lesson as opposed to punishing you to a point where it ruined your career?
Yeah, definitely. So here's a story that I don't tell often, but I have told before. When I was a young sergeant, I was going up for a court martial for alleged hazing, and I was scared to death. I was terrified, and so I go through the whole process, the arraignment. You go through all of these things, and I never forget. When I went in for the proceedings, I was asked, did you do these things? And quite naturally, I said no because I didn't, and I was a young sergeant at the time. I felt that that's what an NCO should be, and basically, the story was took a Marine on a PT run. And the Marine ended up coming back and he went UA after the run and he did a IG complaint. And his IG complaint was that he was hazed and afraid, and that's why he went UA, all of these things. I go through the whole process of this court martial and it ended up being thrown out. And I remember the lieutenant colonel, my squadron commander at the time, he brought me in and he said, Sergeant Robinson, I mean, this could have gone a lot worse for you. But the fact that your reputation, number one, and the type of Marine that everyone knows that you are, it's not in your character to do these things. But you need to watch how you do things and the way you do things, and always have a purpose as to the way that you're training your Marines. And I never forgot that, and that actually carried me through to where I'm at now, because I always thought about training value when it comes to training Marines, and that was one lesson that I learned, and it was no malice whatsoever in what I did, but it just was my mindset and what I thought a sergeant should be, and the way that you should do things. Come on, let's go. We're going on a 10-mile run,
Yeah.
something along those lines. And looking back now, that was a good training evolution for me mentally, going through that, and it helped me. It helped me progress and it helped me grow.
Thanks for sharing. I know telling a personal story like that sometimes can be embarrassing, but just knowing who you are and the caliber of a man you are, there's always a lesson behind it. And I appreciate you sharing it like a
Yeah, no,
testimony.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So any books you've read in your career or recently that you'd recommend for someone to read and why?
Yeah, so one book that I read before I go to a new command to kind of recalibrate my thought process is Who Moved My Cheese? I read that book before I go to a new command every time I transfer a PCS, and it just recalibrates my mind on people, change, because change is inevitable, and how to deal with that change, is the basis of the book. And I read that book every time, and it never gets old. And I learn something new every time I read that book before I PCS.
It's funny, we keep talking about Paris Island, and you bring up that book. We had a workshop when we were at Paris Island where all the senior enlisted had to go attend this workshop, and the workshop was on Who Moved My Cheese. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? We have to go to a PME about Who Moved My Cheese? What is this about? And I remember being very angry, and I wasn't the only one. I hadn't read the book yet. Too busy to read the book. We had too much going on. But when I attended the workshop and I found out what the book was about, it changed my whole perspective. And then, of course, I read it, and then I changed my whole mindset and said what an idiot I was by, putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. So it's interesting that you say that. All right.
Yeah.
A quick speed round off the Marine Corps. I'm going to talk NFL.
Yeah. Okay.
Greatest quarterback in history.
Tom Brady.
Okay.
Tom Brady.
Greatest running back in history.
Walter Payton.
Greatest receiver in history.
Ooh. That's Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice.
Okay. Greatest linebacker. I already know the answer you're going to give.
I'm gonna say Ray Lewis.
I
you
knew
already
it.
know.
You got to do the dance, man. You gotta do his dance when you come out. And I think I know the answer to this one. And I purposely said I'm going to ask you. Greatest defensive back. And I'll just categorize defensive back, safety, and cornerback.
Ooh. Well, I'm gonna have to go Ed Reed.
Over Dion?
I'm gonna have to go Ed Reed over Dion. And I love prime time. I love prime time, but I'm a Ravens fan.
I know.
Die hard.
I knew you'd say Ed Reed. That's one of the reasons I asked. So to kind of prove a point, because a lot of us have these conversations quite a bit with whoever you talk to that's a sports fan, right? Who's the greatest, this, that, and the other. Here's what I've witnessed, and tell me if you think I'm wrong. No matter who I talk to, the greatest quarterback of all time is always a debate. It's never the same person. There's usually like a 5 names that rotate in people's thoughts. You say Tom Brady, this guy says Joe Montana, this guy says John Elway, right?
Yep.
Running backs, same thing. Whoever loves Walter Payton, the next person loves Barry Sanders or Jim Brown, right? But one thing I've noticed is that no one disagrees with the greatest receiver. It's always Jerry Rice every time.
Yeah.
I've never heard someone, I haven't, in an argument say it was somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, you have some close seconds. You have, Terrell Owens and guys like that. But
never, it's never a rotating door. It's always pretty much agreed upon who the greatest receiver is of all time.
Jerry Rice, absolutely.
Yeah. How about a favorite movie or favorite movies? Do you have anything that sticks out in your head that you like to watch when you want to relax or learn something?
Yeah. So, and it's not necessarily learn, but one of my favorite movie series is The Godfather 1, 2, and 3, and those things are long. I'm talking like 4-hour movies, but I could watch all 3 of those back to back, and I have done it. I've done it quite a bit, actually. Those they come on, and they'll have a Godfather marathon, and I love Al Pacino as an actor, so just watch those movies.
Yeah, they're almost as long as this interview's been.
No, definitely. I'm glad that we got a chance to, no technical difficulties or nothing this time. So yeah, it's good.
We could talk forever, and so many stories that we haven't touched on. But I do appreciate your time. And to wrap this up, because we have hit quite a few points today, I want to give you the last word. If there's anything you want to add on to or say, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, no, I just want to say I really appreciate, you even having me on to do this. And, I see a lot of things that you're doing, and it's truly an inspiration to me and many others. And I can tell you that, you really mean a lot to a lot of people, and especially me. I really appreciate this opportunity. And, we talk all the time, and this is no different than the conversations we have on the phone, but just really appreciate the time and you having me on for this.
It's my pleasure to have you. And being retired, we've talked about this for so long that, one thing that was important to me that I hope influenced people like you and others that were there when I retired, I remember vividly, I said, this ends my time on active duty, but not my time being active. And what you want to do after retirement is a version of being active. For me, it was like I wanted to be adventurous and physical. And fortunately, even though I continued on with employment overseas, I've been able to travel and live a life that I wanted to do when I was at the Corps, but there were too many restrictions and obligations that I couldn't do on my own because of the job status. And I don't vacation much. I adventure a lot. So I enjoy adventuring and going to epic places and learning something and kind of testing myself outside of a comfort zone, going alone sometimes or going with a small group, being resourceful and putting myself through physical challenges. That's been I'll be honest with you, it's been an outlet for me. So whenever we talk about, like, let's say PTSD, which we could talk for another 2 hours on that,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
any stress or any obligations that I have that like weigh me down, my outlet has been to be adventurous and to be physical and to be completely isolated and remote and find a tranquility. And I knew that and I went after it. And I've been fortunate enough to have that kind of life. And again, I've had people tell me, you're so lucky. And I'm like, well, it's not really luck. I wanted to do it. If I didn't have money, which I've been in that situation too, I still found outlets that I'm describing because it's a cheap hobby. I don't have to go to a luxurious island to do it. I can go to a state park or national park or something nearby where I live and still make it happen. And I've done it. I've experienced that too. And I hope that influences people like you that are pushing towards retirement to find what your passion might be. It doesn't have to be what mine is, but at least find your passion. Don't try to follow something that you think is the success line that everyone else has done. Find your path after you retire.
Yeah, and I will tell you this, and this is what has inspired me a lot, even on the days where I don't feel like doing anything. You know, there are two words that you always say, and I don't know if you paid attention to how impactful these two words are, but get outside. You know, and when you say that, I hear it ringing in my head, and I think about that. I'm like, I'm being lazy today. Let me get out and do something physical, even if it's just light jog or something like that. I'll try to get out and do something.
I appreciate that. And it's a remedy. Whether it's my children, whether it's a pet, whether it's me, when people are angry and ornery and you go outside, fresh air or something in nature, it tends to change your whole attitude and thought process. At least it does for me and the people I've been around. And
yeah, very therapeutic.
Yep, very therapeutic. And I'm glad you said that. Yeah, thanks again. Well, look, man, I appreciate your time as always, and all the best to you. We'll be in touch. Happy
Definitely,
birthday.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the time, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday again. Let me get a virtual fist pump.
Boom.
All right, man. See you.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Yeah.